What is nirvana, or in the Pali language, Nibbana, in the early texts of Buddhism? That is, in the sutras of the Pali Canon. Why should we want this? Why should we drop everything to gain this? How can this be the cure that we all need? Negatively, these texts tell us that nirvana is not samsara, and that it's the end, it's the cessation of suffering, and of the fires of hatred, lust, and delusion. It's described as unconditioned, that is, not influenced by any of the five skandhas. To gain nirvana is not supposed to be the annihilation of the self. It's not that you cease to exist. It's said to be uncharacterizable, basically indescribable, maybe inconceivable. It's also described negatively as unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. And positively, it's supposed to be an escape. It's an escape from all the things which are born, which do become, and which are made. Positively, it's also described as bliss, refuge, destination, freedom, purity, the far shore. The historian Solomon Negosian tries to summarize it like this. He says that in the earliest text, nirvana is an inscrutable state of absolute transcendence. And transcendent just means going beyond. And nirvana is described as coming in two stages or having two elements. They talk about nirvana with residue or with remainder. That's a state that one can reach in this life. In the early texts, this is described as having become an arhat or arahant. That is, a worthy one. If you've gained nirvana in that sense, then this is going to be your last lifetime. You are destined to then gain nirvana upon death. Nirvana without remainder is what you get after your last lifetime. It's really what we've been describing up here. You could say it's nirvana, properly speaking. So the ultimate goal in classical Buddhism is this thing that we've been struggling to gain this latest bit of understanding of. We should also add that contemporary Buddhists sometimes just purely focus on this. They don't believe in an inscrutable state of absolute transcendence that one can gain in some sense after the end of one's last life. Sometimes Western Buddhists and modernist Buddhists really are just focused on the kind of benefits, on the kind of cure they can get in this life, to be more ethical, more peaceful, less lustful, acquisitive, controlling, and so on. Although in various places Gautama says that because of his enlightenment, because of his achievement, this is his last life, and he's already had his last birth, yet he also, in a famous discussion, says that when it comes to an enlightened being, when it comes to someone who is gained nirvana, none of the following apply. He's being questioned by a disciple, and he wants to know what happens when one gains nirvana. Is it the case that one is reborn? And no. Is it the case that such a person is not reborn? No. Is such a person both reborn and not reborn? No. Is such a person neither reborn nor not reborn? No. The disciple says, quote, "Here I have fallen into bewilderment, Master Gautama." End quote. Well, me too. Here's one way to understand it. If there's no self, there's nothing that could either be reborn or fail to be reborn. And so maybe he's rejecting all of four of these options because there is no self, and he thinks the question presupposes that there is a self. So in other words, the disciple is wondering what's going to happen to himself if he should get nirvana. And there's not really a good answer to that. And that's why it's wrong to say that nirvana is an annihilation of the self, because there ain't no such thing to be annihilated. In one place, he uses a metaphor of a flame. So imagine that you blow out a candle, and someone might ask, well, where'd the flame go? Of course, it didn't go anywhere. It's just that the combustion process ceased, that's all. He says, quote, "So too, the Tathagata, the thus gone one," that's a title for himself, the Buddha, "has abandoned that form by which one might describe him," end quote. He says that in the state of nirvana, he's abandoned the 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates. He's now, quote, deep, immeasurable, hard to fathom, like the ocean, end quote. Maybe about the most we could say is that the 5 skandhas, because they're characterized by suffering, have all ceased, and yet there's something left over. You can see why some Western interpreters have thought that nirvana is just ceasing to exist. Well, it's the cessation of all the processes that you normally mistake for yourself. But Buddhist philosophers will vigorously deny that it's supposed to be you ceasing to exist. You have to decide what you make of this. Is this just nonsense? Is it just jibber-jab? Is it just double talk? Or is there something really wonderful here that might be worth dedicating your whole life to the pursuit of? That's something you'll have to answer. So that ends our quick look at Buddhist philosophy as presented in the earliest sutras. Next, we'll have a quick look at 3 of the most famous and widely read Mahayana sutras.